Senator Hann.
Thank you, Madam President, members, and anyone who may be watching at this late hour. I don't think it's rare that you see a very clear, stark difference between where the Democrat majority is in this body and where the Republicans are. We had a big budget last year. $2.1 billion in increased new spending was the budget we passed last year. And as Senator Pratt just mentioned, it was a compromise, but at $2.1 billion of new spending. And the things that we didn't do a tax bill, we didn't do a transportation bill, and we had a $900 million surplus because we didn't do those things. And so we come here today, and we have a supplementary budget bill that spends, including the tails, $1.2 billion more dollars. That's over half of what we just spent in the entire budget last year. And you know what? It wasn't enough just to spend the surplus money. We had to take $238 million out of the Health Care Access Fund. I think at one point Senator Cohen called that a shift or a gimmick, or it was a shifty gimmick. I'm not sure which, but the appetite to spend every penny that the majority can get their hands on is abundantly clear. And the thing that we said we needed to do when we came here this year, we said we needed to get a tax bill done, and we said we needed to get a transportation package completed. There's been no work to this date on a transportation bill. Some of us are not sure that the majority is ever going to get to that. And what we suggested in our amendment, that we, over great objection and great parliamentary maneuvering to prevent a vote on the majority's behalf, we finally did get a vote, and that amendment did not go on. But what that amendment called for was simply $463 million of the surplus, no tails, no shifting of money from the Health Care Access Fund, but $463 million of the surplus to use for transportation projects across the state. And while it doesn't solve the problem that we all know we face to find some kind of commitment to do ongoing transportation funding, it does do something. And it does do something that every member of this body and the other body would agree needs to be done, which is to put money into transportation, into the infrastructure of roads and bridges. And while there are other things that many of us want to do, we all agree on the importance of doing that one thing. But we decided, the majority decided today, that they did not want to do that either. Instead of spending money on transportation infrastructure, they said, no, let's spend another $1.2 billion to add to a budget, a $2.1 billion budget we just passed last year. It's hard to even look at that as a supplemental budget. It's more like add on another half again of the budget we just passed. And I don't understand why we're doing this. I don't know if the public understands. They send us here and they say very clearly, get something done, get the transportation done. Instead, we just say, no, we're going to spend another $1.2 billion because we have the money and we can find the money, and we'll take some from health care access. Even though we spent all that money, and I think Senator Benson mentioned this, the one thing that is not in this bill that arguably should have been in the bill is some reform to MNsure. If there's anything that we all agree is a huge problem, we hear from constituents almost every day about escalating premiums, 50, 60, 70% premium growth, high deductibles, the inability to get through the MNsure system to get enrolled or to get changes, or losing your insurance, or having your providers get changed from all those things, which we were told would never happen. They've all been happening. We all know it. We all experience it. We think that we ought to try to direct some attention to fixing that, but there's nothing in this bill, even though we're spending $1.2 billion, that does anything to relieve any of those problems. Instead, we're spending a lot of money on things, and while some of them might be arguably okay, good, maybe, but do we have to spend that money today and leave these other things undone, the reform to MNsure? If you're going to spend money, and we should maybe think about that, but certainly the priority of transportation. So I'm going to vote against this bill. I would urge a red vote on this bill. I would urge that we would refocus our attention to doing the thing that is the priority of this session, taxes and transportation. And so, members, it's been a long day, but I think a revealing day because I think the public sees where the two caucuses are and what their priorities are.
Senator Cohen.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, members, for your participation this afternoon, and thank you to all the division chairs and the members of the divisions, both majority and minority members, who've spent all their time putting together this bill. Members, just a couple of minutes. We've had talk about the nature of the bill. Clearly, this is the way that the Senate has operated over the decades preceding any of us in this body. And the attempt is not to deal with, in this even-numbered year, a finance bill that is a deficiency bill, unless that's called for, or a bill that's an emergency bill, but to deal with the bill as it's titled, the Supplemental Finance Bill, to supplement what we've done, to try to recognize problems not addressed in the previous year, and to do things that will enhance the quality of life in the state. And without making the effort to go through every individual article, I'll just point out a couple of things. If you look at the E12 bill and look at the provision for the teacher shortage, the legislation authored by Senator Dahl, everybody knows that in their districts, we're facing a significant shortage of having the support, the teachers in the classrooms. This is the effort we are making to begin dealing with that situation, which will only be exacerbated. So we might tell the schools and the students, wait until next year, wait until the following year, the year after, and it does nothing but grow the problem. I would also suggest that if you take a look, and I think Senator Pratt made a reference to Senator Kent's bill relative to the provision for counseling services, and suggested that this is something that ought to be left to the discretion of the districts. The districts, as we know, and irrespective of where anybody comes from, we know the districts throughout the state are under a great deal of pressure. Yet the problems in the schools grow. And in all honesty, as I mentioned a few hours ago, the problems are different from where they were 30 and 40 and 50 years ago. We have a different mix of population, we have a different mix of student, and it calls for some additional services into the classroom and into the schools. For the first time, we're trying to deal with that in a comprehensive way that will make a difference. I would also suggest that you look at something like Senator Bonhoeff's higher education article. This is Senator Bonhoeff's last higher education article. She has been a spectacular chair of her division, doing things in a comprehensive and analytical way. In this particular article, I look at what she's mentioned in terms of some of the equity provisions, the enhanced support to both MnSCU and the University of Minnesota to provide summer sessions, to provide mentoring services for students to make sure that they can go from entering a school, a higher education facility, to graduating and going on to being a functioning person in our Minnesota society. I'd mention a couple of other areas that I think are of great importance. We've heard a lot of talk about the fact that we have potentially a part of the state left out, rural Minnesota. And the drumbeat I've heard over and over and over again, that if there is one way to try to enhance the viability and the economic status of rural Minnesota, it's to try to put money into broadband. Senator Schmidt has been a tireless advocate for broadband in this body and in the state of Minnesota. And in this bill, we provide $85 million, not quite at the level of the governor, but if you take the amount that we provided last year, which was not very significant, the $10 million, that was something left undone. And add to that the $85 million, coupled with the federal money coming into the state, we now have an effort available to people in Minnesota to try to bring rural Minnesota and its economy up to a level, if not the metropolitan area, getting closer to that. And I would also suggest something that we provided in a way that's never been done before. And that's the work that Senator Champion and Senator Hayden put into the equity article of this bill. I am extremely proud of what members of the Senate have done relative to the equity article. We've never done this before, but I think everybody in this body agrees that it is an absolute disgrace as to the fact that we have portions of our state's population that are left behind and left out in a way that grows and grows and grows and grows. And in this bill, we have the first effort made in a comprehensive way to tell those populations, we understand you, You are part of Minnesota, and we are going to do what we can, recognizing decades of ignorance on the part of governments to bring you into Minnesota in a way that has not been done before. Those are, I think, some of the highlights in this bill, members, and I think reasons that would suggest any member of this body should be able and proud to vote yes on House File 2749. So I appreciate the attention members have given to this bill. Let me just finally, I think all the division chairs had a chance to thank staff working for them. Let me just mention, in my particular case, the counsel to the Finance Committee, Mr. Tom Bodern, who heads Senate Counsel and Research, the Chief Fiscal Analyst, Eric Naumann, my particular staff, Nicole Kaplan and Josh Nye. I would also like to mention a few of the people that kind of are the forgotten people in the Senate. You know, we see the work that they do. We see them come into the committees. Those of us who are in the Senate don't necessarily deal with them on a day-to-day basis, but that would be in Senate Counsel and Research, the secretarial and support staff. Greg Cato, Renee Rose, Robin Rumsa, Tim Greenfield, Diane Vogelsag, and Sandy Yanez Larson. They work hours and hours to allow us to do whatever we're trying to do for our districts and the state of Minnesota. And I think we should acknowledge what they've done for us as well as our constituency. They do spectacular work. So, Madam President, hope members will vote yes on House File 2749. Thank you very much.
Seeing no further discussion, the Secretary will take the roll. Secretary will close the roll. There being 39 ayes and 24 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.